Today's guest has an interesting way of answering the how questions. How can my voice be heard? How can I help end racism? For Loki Mulholland, activism began early as the son of civil rights legend Joan Trumpauer Mulholland. Yet it didn't end there. Today, he continues his mother's legacy educating students about the civil rights movement and making a difference through the educational nonprofit organization, the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation. As an Emmy-winning filmmaker, he uses his talents and platform to capture stories of triumph and bravery, including the story of his mother and her courageous fight for civil rights. Overall, he is an example of how we can and do make a difference by making our voices heard. And you speak to white people not having to speak against racism. That's a privilege in and of itself. But in recent weeks, we've seen white privilege as a topic of debate on social media. What is your perspective on that topic and its effect on change?
There's so the debate on white privilege. For those who don't want to believe in it, of course, it's like that's just liberal nonsense. And I don't have privilege because look, I was born poor. That sort of stuff. So they don't understand actually what that means. So I try to explain to people that look, it means you have an advantage that just no one else has, that you did nothing for. I mean, literally, if you are white in America, if you're a white male in America in particular, you won the lottery. Let's just be honest. Anyone born in America won the lottery, but we got the grand prize, right? Because we designed the country for us, plain and simple. That was what America, might not have been what it was founded for, but it was what it is, right? You might have your ideals of, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and all men are created equal and these sort of things, and all sounds good. But at the end of the day, it was white men. And everyone else had to fight to get those same rights that are supposedly afforded to everybody. So with that privilege, it's recognizing that you have it and understanding what that means, and then how to go about using it to help other people. So, for example, I myself, I use that privilege because when I speak on these topics, I know that if a Black person speaks on these topics, that's an angry Black man. Well, of course, a Black person's going to talk about racism because, give me a break, right? But white people ain't going to listen to them unless, they look like Will Smith. Right. I feel safe with someone like Halle Berry or Will Smith, but anyone else, oh man, it's a little hard, because of the tropes that we've been fed and so forth. So it's an angry Black woman, it's an angry Black man talking about racism. Whereas when I talk about it, now I do get people who have said to me, well, you have absolute hate for the white race. You must hate yourself, go kill yourself, those sort of things. But for the majority of the people, the normal, sane people, it's much more approachable because I look like them. And that's a natural thing, Yeah, there's bias in there, but at the same time, that's just a natural thing anyways. And so I use that to my advantage because I know they're going to listen a little more. And of course, then I whip out my mom's, mugshot and stuff and the freedom rides, and I can talk about her. And now they see themselves. Representation is so important in education. And so if they can see themselves in that struggle, as part of that struggle, then they go, wow, okay, now they're more willing to listen. So with the film The Uncomfortable Truth, for example, which is about the history of racism in America, I didn't point fingers at other people. I pointed it at my family that was involved, constructing all of this, going all the way back to Jamestown. So I take away the excuses. And I take away the defensiveness as well. Because when you attack someone's ignorance, they're going to double down on stupid. They're going to be, that's when the walls go up and they get, that defensive mechanism. Well, I never owned any slaves, that sort of rhetoric. Just leave it in the past, those sort of things. So I'm able to take those down. But that's, again, using that privilege. And we have that opportunity in our everyday lives to do that as long as we go back to that previous principle of having that courage to be anti-racist, and then to use our privilege and go, okay, I can create these opportunities. I'm a hiring manager at the company I work at, right? I have the choice of who I want to hire and what candidates I'm going to bring in the door. I have the choice to go, okay, let me go find other people who don't look like me and think like me, because we want to create more diverse product, diverse thought. So I can actively go out and pursue that. That's using my privilege. It opens doors and creates opportunities. We need each other to survive.
How do you think our relationship in government affects the racial climate of today? And what can our leadership do to enact immediate and effective change?
Our leadership clearly, the tone is set at the top. That's always been the case. We can go back to Abraham Lincoln, for example, with the Civil War, that when it wasn't going well, and Lincoln needed something for people to rally around. So the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, that changed the dynamic and the tone of everything. Now, it's not to say that Lincoln was perfect. I mean, he came a long way to figure out, we need to end slavery and those sort of things. So he was able to set that tone. Today, the tone is very different than it was under President Obama, under even George W. Bush, right? It's a very different tone, and it empowers people. Just as Obama empowered people to have hope and to actually start looking at their neighbor as themselves and those sort of things. We have an administration today that is trying to be divisive, that is using the same old tropes that have been used before, and mechanisms of fear, not courage, fear. These are the type of things that Governor George Wallace did, right? That Ronald Reagan did. Because it works for a certain sect of people, and those people vote. For us to change that, and because the second part of the question was simply, what can leaders do to change that? Well, it's up to us to choose the right leaders. Don't leave it to the leaders to do that. And our system of government, it's not just merely voting for the right person, it's also holding those people accountable, right? And that's what freedom of the press is all about. Freedom of speech is all about, and preserving those things and the right to vote. And so we got to be willing to, take it to the ballot box. If you don't like what someone's doing, vote them out, and then hold the next person there accountable. And that's really going to change the tone. But we can't expect leadership to do it just because we put them in there. We've got to be willing to do the work as well. That's part of, living in a republic and having the ability to vote. There's an old song, "Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me." We got to be the change that we want to see. Everything is local. All the way down to the most basic level of government, school superintendents and so forth, and school boards and things. Everything is local. So we got to be willing to make those changes locally, and that matriculates up as well. And then the tone that ends up being set at the top starts to come down, because we see that. We saw that with the Trump administration. The things he says and the things he does, and how that went to politicians throughout the country. Well, if he's saying it, then we can say it, because it's working for him. It will work for us. No one's holding him accountable, so no one's going to hold us accountable. And then that gets down into the populace in and of itself. So now you get people just popping off saying stuff, in grocery stores and whatever else, and police officers who either they're being more exposed or they're feeling more empowered. I don't know which it is, but now they feel they can get away with stuff. It's not even a conscientious thing. They just see it and then they just absorb that. But now you're also seeing people go, getting out their cameras, getting it on the press, to the news and so forth, and saying, hey, this person needs to be held accountable, right, for their actions. If you're going to go on Facebook and say something, and you're representing the school district, and you're, well, guess, you're a teacher or whatever else, guess what? We don't want you teaching in our community if that's the way you're going to be. And if, it's called, accountability. You got to own your actions. If that's the way, if you want to say that and act like that, well, guess what? There's repercussions for that. There's consequences. There's always good and evil. We just got to decide which side we want to be on, and then make that choice. No matter how dark it is, even one speck of light means it's not, is that one, bit of hope, that one ray, and you can start from there. The sun still shines on a rainy day. You might not see it. The clouds can be, dark as night and it's raining nonstop. The wind's going to be, swirling around about, but the sun's actually still shining behind those clouds. We just have to remember that it's still there, that those clouds will eventually move on. That's, I have to remind myself of that sometimes. Good does triumph in the end.
And in order to see that good, you see that the candidates in the current election are pushing for voters to register, use their vote, and enact change themselves by voting for someone who can change it. Do you think the power of the vote has changed in the last 60 years?
The power of the vote hasn't changed. The suppression of votes has, which just tells you exactly how powerful the vote is. When I hear people who say, well, my vote doesn't matter, what's the point? That's exactly what they want you to think. Your vote matters so much that they're trying to take it away. Just to consider that for a moment. Not every vote matters. We've seen that, and we saw that in the last election. We've seen that in the 2018 election. Just X number of votes made all the difference. That's why vote suppression is for me. I do care how you vote, because I don't think we should be voting for racists and sexists and so forth. We should be voting for people who are for all America, right? That wants someone that wants to be the president of the United States, for everyone. But at the end of the day, we got to make sure we're doing our part to get that person in there. All those little things matter, and the power of that vote remains. And again, the suppression of it's a whole different thing, and it's gotten worse. But that just proves how vitally important it is. I remember once I live in Utah. It's a very red state, right? Quite honestly, I sometimes kind of wonder if my vote would even matter. I said that to my mom when Obama was running for a second term. I was like, I don't think I even bother voting. It's not going to matter here. My mom said, you know what? My friends died so you can vote. That's all she had to say. It was just another reminder. Whether it makes a difference in my particular portion of the election, yeah, gerrymandering and so forth, it might not, like particularly here in Utah. Or in some cases for some people in different parts of Mississippi, same sort of thing, right? We have that all over the country. You don't get a voice. That is your opportunity to have a voice, and then to say, "Hey, look, I voted, and I'm making sure that hey, I put my 2 cents on the table now, and now you're going to listen whether I voted for you or not." But going back to my point, I now remember what I was going to say is, I do care who you vote for personally, but more importantly, I want to make sure everyone can vote. Whether you're going to vote for the person I think is the most suitable candidate or not is neither here nor there, but everyone should have equal access to that right to vote. We all have the right to vote now. We just don't have it equally. There's those barriers in place, not to stop you from voting, but to frustrate you from voting. So voter ID is an example of that. The barrier is it's hard to get. They've probably, the DMVs are closed down. They're only open a certain number of days a month. That costs money. So it's, it really is a poll tax, right? All those things. And people are like, well, if you really cared about voting, if it was that important, you get the ID. Okay. That's still a sacrifice. But why make it hard for people to vote?
With all those barriers in place, why do you think we should vote?
It's what the system is all about. Otherwise, we're not the United States of America. It's our right. Everything is based around who's in office and who we vote for. Where the resources go into communities and so forth. All of that is around voting. It's not just a matter of just someone sitting in the White House. It's all the people that person appoints. All of that matters. It's the person who's going to represent you and your principles and what you feel is most important. And whoever gets into office is supposedly supposed to represent everyone within that particular district, state, country. Whether if it's a Republican, state legislator, and you're a Democrat, well, guess what? You still get to go there and tell them what you think. They're supposed to represent you and your needs. And if they don't, then guess what? You also have the ability to vote them out. Luvon Brown, who's the co-host of my podcast called The Uncomfortable Truth. He's a freedom rider from Mississippi, and he says, if you don't vote, then your candidate won, and you don't have anything to complain about. Because you said, you know what? I don't care who wins. So you can't complain.
Loki, thank you for joining us for our Cool Talk conversation. We look forward to talking to you again. Thank you for joining us for our Cool Talks. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
To learn more, visit the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation's website. There you can find educational resources, the Uncomfortable Truth podcast, as well as the documentaries An Ordinary Hero, The Uncomfortable Truth, and After Selma, directed by Loki Mulholland, Joan's son. You can also donate to the cause.